Hello, my dear masterminds. You never changed for them. You just stopped hiding who you really were. And the moment that happened, the entire atmosphere around you shifted, because for a long time, they were comfortable with the version of you that stayed quiet, the version that played small, the version that made everyone else feel safe by never fully stepping into your own power. They didn't mind you when you were shrinking yourself to fit into rooms that were too small for your spirit. They didn't mind you when you softened your edges, lowered your voice, muted your instincts, and acted like you didn't see what was really going on. They mistook your patience for weakness. They mistook your restraint for fear. They mistook your silence for permission. But what they never understood was that you were never hiding because you were unsure. You were hiding because you were waiting for timing, waiting for clarity, waiting for the moment when pretending would feel more painful than standing in your truth. And when that moment arrived, you didn't announce it. You didn't ask for understanding. You didn't explain yourself. You just stopped performing. You stopped diluting your thoughts. You stopped negotiating your identity. You stopped bending to expectations that were built for someone you were never meant to be. And that's when everything changed. People started reacting differently. Conversations shifted. Energy shifted. Some people got uncomfortable. Some people got quiet. Some people got defensive. Some people walked away, because the truth is, the real you doesn't need approval. And that unsettles people who were only comfortable with your limits. You didn't become arrogant. You became aligned. You didn't become cold. You became clear. You didn't become distant. You became selective. And that level of self-honesty disrupts everything it touches. It exposes dynamics that were built on imbalance. It dissolves patterns that depended on your compliance. It rewrites rules that only worked when you stayed unaware of your own worth. The reason they say you changed is because the old version of you was convenient. The real version of you is uncontrollable. And when someone steps into that kind of self-recognition, the world either adjusts or resists. There is no middle ground. You didn't betray who you were. You returned to who you always were before the world told you to be smaller. And that return, that's what they're reacting to. The wildest part is this: the moment you stopped hiding, they finally saw what was there all along. Not a new version of you, but the unfiltered one. And that version didn't just walk into the room, it shifted the entire room's center of gravity. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand attention. You didn't try to convince anybody of anything. Your presence alone carried a clarity that made every mask in front of you feel heavier. And that's why they started scrambling. Because people who benefited from your silence call your authenticity a challenge. People who relied on you dimming your light call your confidence changing. People who expected you to shrink call your growth distance. But deep down, they know exactly what happened. You reclaimed your narrative. You reclaimed your tone. You reclaimed your intuition, the one they always underestimated, even when it was the sharpest thing in the room. And when someone stands in that kind of truth, it rearranges the entire social landscape. You'll notice how suddenly the wrong ones fall back. They don't drift, they drop, because the real you doesn't validate their illusions anymore. You'll notice how the right ones lean in, not because you've become someone else, but because you finally became visible to those who are aligned with your real frequency. And somewhere in between those exits and entrances, You'll realize how much energy you wasted protecting identities that were never yours. You were never meant to play small so others could feel big. You were never meant to apologize for traits that were actually your gifts. You were never meant to shrink to match rooms that weren't designed for your spirit. That's why your evolution looks like rebellion to people who were attached to your limits. And that's why your honesty looks like disruption to people who relied on your silence. What they call you changing is just you waking up. What they call you acting different is just you reclaiming pieces of yourself they weren't supposed to hold. They didn't lose you. They lost access to the version of you that was never sustainable. And that loss feels like chaos to them, because the real you doesn't orbit their expectations anymore. They don't get to decide your tone. They don't get to define your worth. They don't get to frame your story. You're writing your own script now, and the pen is finally in the right hands, yours. And now they're sitting with the consequences of finally seeing you clearly. Something that demands isolation, observation, and transformation. And while they were out there, assuming your story was already written, you were learning to hold a pen they didn't think you'd ever pick up. You studied yourself. You confronted your shadows. You broke out of loops they didn't even know you were trapped in. They thought the silence around you meant stagnation. It meant preparation. Every time life pressed you with something heavy, you didn't crumble. You recalibrated. They saw pauses. You were downloading an entirely new system, and now your presence holds a gravity they can't replicate. They don't understand how you became so steady, so certain, so self-defined. But the truth is simple. Certainty grows when you stop betraying your own instincts. Strength arrives when you stop explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you. Power unlocks when you stop performing versions of yourself for acceptance. You didn't grow louder, you grew grounded. You didn't get colder, you got precise. You didn't become distant, you became intentional about what deserves access to you. And that level of alignment unsettles people who are comfortable with you being uncertain, because uncertainty is controllable. Alignment isn't. They can't push your buttons the same way anymore, because you moved the control panel inside. They can't predict your reactions, because you're not reacting, you're choosing. They can't corner you with expectations, because you no longer need to be seen a certain way to feel valid. And that's the part they struggle to accept the most. The new you isn't fueled by proving anything. The new you isn't driven by comparison. The new you doesn't need to be right in their eyes because you're finally right within yourself. And when someone reaches that level of self-trust, their entire presence changes. Their posture changes. Their patience changes. Their decisions change. Their silence changes. It's no longer empty, it's charged. It's no longer passive, it's deliberate. It's no longer fear, it's focus. That's why they keep misinterpreting you now. They think you're distant when you're actually centered. They think you're detached when you're actually disciplined. They think you've changed when you've actually stabilized. The version of you they miss was the version that doubted itself. The version you've become is the one that listens to itself. And there is no going back from that. Once you realize your power doesn't need permission, you stop asking. Once you realize your truth doesn't require approval, you stop explaining. Once you realize your presence doesn't need validation, you stop seeking. And that's when the world truly begins to adjust around you. Not because you demanded it, but because alignment always reshapes its surroundings. They keep replaying old versions of you in their minds, trying to figure out where the shift happened, trying to pinpoint the exact moment you changed, as if transformation is a single event instead of a slow burn that happens in private. They don't see the process. The nights you chose discipline over distraction, the moments you swallowed your reactions and sharpened your awareness instead, the internal victories that never made noise. All they see is the result, and results always confuse people who ignored the process. You didn't wake up powerful one day. You trained your mind to stop folding under pressure. You trained your emotions to stop controlling your direction. You trained your focus to stop scattering every time someone doubted you. That's what they're sensing now, the weight of someone who has already faced themselves and survived. The reason your presence feels heavier to them is because it's anchored. You're no longer floating between identities. You're no longer apologizing for your intensity. You're no longer smoothing your edges so others can stay comfortable. And comfort was the only leverage they ever had over you. Once you took that away, once you stopped cushioning your truth, the entire dynamic flipped. Now they're cautious with their words. Now they measure their behavior around you. Now they wonder what you see that you're not saying. They feel observed without being watched. They feel evaluated without being judged. Because your awareness is quiet but direct, you don't need to confront when your clarity already speaks for you. You don't need to dominate when your steadiness already sets the tone. You don't need to announce strength when your boundaries already enforce it. That's why they feel unsettled. They were familiar with the version of you that negotiated with uncertainty. They don't recognize the version of you that doesn't negotiate with misalignment at all. This version walks away without drama. This version chooses silence without fear. This version selects peace without guilt. And that kind of self-command isn't loud. It's undeniable. It shifts rooms. It recalibrates conversations. It forces people to either rise or retreat. There is no comfortable middle anymore. You didn't outgrow people because you thought you were better than them. You outgrew them because you stopped being smaller than yourself. And that difference is everything. They can call it pride. They can call it distance. They can call it change. But you know what it really is. It's the moment you decided that self-respect was no longer optional. And once that decision is made, the world has no choice but to respond accordingly. And now you see it clearly. The way the world rearranges itself when you stop pretending to be less than you are. You feel it in the pauses between conversations. You notice it in the hesitation behind certain smiles. You sense it in the way some people suddenly don't know where they stand with you anymore. That confusion isn't weakness on their part. It's the shock of realizing they no longer control the version of you they once understood. You used to be predictable to them. You used to be readable. You used to be someone they could label quickly and place comfortably inside their expectations. That illusion is gone now. And when illusions dissolve, people scramble quietly before they ever react openly. They're not afraid of you. They're uneasy with what your awakening represents. What your confidence reflects about their hesitation. What your boundaries reveal about their habits. What your growth exposes about their stagnation. You didn't become intimidating. You became self-directed, and self-directed people can't be steered, guilted, pressured, or manipulated the way they once could. That's why the air feels different now. You don't argue the way you used to. You don't explain the way you used to. You don't chase clarity the way you used to. You already have it. And clarity changes everything. It changes how you speak. It changes how you listen. It changes how you wait. It changes how you choose. You don't rush to prove yourself because you're no longer negotiating your value. You don't rush to defend yourself because you've already accepted who you are. And that internal acceptance is louder than any external approval ever could be. They try to test you now in subtle ways, small comments, slight shifts, quiet challenges, to see if the old version still exists somewhere they can reach. But every time they test, they get the same result: composure, discernment, distance. Not coldness, control, not arrogance, certainty. And that unsettles them more than confrontation ever would, because confrontation gives them something familiar to push against. Your calm gives them nothing to grab. You've become unhookable, unbotherable, unreadable in the ways that used to make you vulnerable. And in that unreadability, you've found a new kind of freedom. You're no longer reacting to every ripple. You're deciding which waves deserve your attention. You're no longer adjusting your identity to fit rooms that don't deserve your presence. You're selecting your environments with intention. And intention is the difference between drifting through life and commanding your direction. They feel that shift in you, even if they can't name it. They feel the way you're no longer available to dynamics that once drained you. They feel the way you no longer bend to emotional pressure. They feel the way you don't need to be seen to feel solid. And that realization quietly rearranges the hierarchy in every room you enter. And now everything makes sense to you in a way it never did before. The tension you used to feel in certain rooms, the subtle resistance you couldn't explain, the strange pull toward growth that never let you stay comfortable for long. You weren't losing people. You were outgrowing versions of yourself that could no longer carry where your life was headed. That's the truth. They're only now starting to feel. The reason your presence feels different isn't because you're trying to dominate anything. It's because you're no longer hiding the authority you always had over your own direction. You're no longer asking life what you're allowed to become. You're deciding. And decision is the moment power becomes real. They keep calling it change because they need a word that makes your evolution feel temporary. But this isn't a phase. This is alignment. This is what happens when someone finally stops splitting themselves into acceptable pieces for other people's comfort. This is what happens when self-respect outweighs social approval. This is what happens when instinct finally outranks insecurity. You didn't wake up one morning and become someone else. You remembered who you were before the world taught you to hesitate. And that remembrance is irreversible. They sense it now, in the way you don't rush your answers, in the way you don't chase attention, in the way you don't compete for validation. You've stepped into a frequency that doesn't beg to be heard, it just is. And anything that doesn't resonate with it naturally falls out of range. That's why people are reacting without knowing why. That's why dynamics are shifting without discussion. That's why certain doors are closing without argument while new ones open without effort. You didn't force these outcomes. You aligned with yourself, and alignment did the rest. They can say you're different. They can say you changed. They can say you're not the same anymore. And they're right about one thing. You're not the same. You're clearer. You're steadier. You're no longer divided between who you are and who you pretend to be. The old you needed reassurance. The new you carries certainty. The old you hesitated to take space. The new you knows exactly when to step in and when to walk away. And the most important shift, you stopped waiting to be chosen and chose yourself first. That's the shift that rearranges everything. They didn't lose you because you became distant. They lost the version of you that made their comfort easier than your truth. You didn't change for them. You simply stopped hiding for them. And that decision didn't just reveal who you are. It revealed who was never meant to walk with you into this next chapter. And here's the part they don't know how to process yet. The version of you standing here now is only the beginning of what happens when someone finally stops negotiating with their own truth. This chapter you're in isn't the peak, it's the foundation. Everything you stripped away, every illusion you dropped, every mask you retired, that was preparation. The old you survived confusion. The new you moves with direction. The old you asked questions. The new you is the answer. They will keep trying to understand what shifted, when it shifted, how it happened. They will keep studying your tone, your silence, your choices, your stillness. But they won't find a single moment. They'll only find a pattern of discipline, self-honesty, and quiet decisions that added up to something they can't reverse. Because this kind of evolution doesn't announce itself with noise. It announces itself with permanence. You are no longer becoming, you are being, and the energy of being is unstoppable. Rooms will feel smaller to you now. Conversations will feel slower. Excuses will sound louder. Because once your inner world sharpens, everything external becomes more obvious. You'll notice how people reveal themselves without speaking. You'll sense intentions before they're acted on. You'll notice how people reveal themselves without speaking. You'll sense intentions before they're acted on. You'll feel shifts before they happen. Not because you're superior, but because you're aligned. And alignment always looks like awareness to those who are still drifting. They will call you intense, distant, different because they aren't used to someone who means what they say, who restricts access they never earned, who no longer hesitates for their comfort. Let them talk. You didn't come this far to be understood by people who never listened to you when you were still soft. You didn't survive becoming yourself just to dilute it again for comfort. You paid too much to earn this clarity. You walked too far in silence to turn back into noise, and the universe respects that. Opportunity respects that. Life rearranges itself around people who stop lying to themselves. That's why things are opening now without force. That's why paths are aligning without struggle. That's why what once felt heavy is beginning to feel guided. You're not chasing anymore. You're choosing. You're not reacting anymore. You're directing. You're not hiding anymore. You're present. And presence is the rarest form of power. They will remember the old you because it was easier for them. You will honor the new you because it is finally real. And from this point forward, every step you take will feel quieter on the outside and louder in its impact. Because when someone stops hiding who they are, reality has no choice but to respond.